All right. Hi, everyone. I am Brett Norton, and welcome back to session number 2 of today's conference. Real quick, I wanted to highlight the features on the screen before we get into introductions for the panelists. The resource window is on the right side with sponsor resources, and there is also a Q&A window along with the speaker bios. So throughout the panel today, feel free to go ahead and ask any questions that are relevant to the discussion, and we'll try and weave those in either throughout the discussion or at the very end. We do have some new features. Maybe some of you have seen these in the last couple of conferences, but we do have some smiley face or emoji icons. So throughout the conference, feel free to engage with a thumbs up, a heart, or a smiley face. Those are always good. Love to have that interaction as well. Our speakers today are Brian Stewart. Brian is the Director of Surgical Asset Management and Field Services at Aesculap. In his role, Brian provides consulting services to hospitals to help improve their processes and streamline their surgical tray management through data solutions and workflow optimization. Melanie Perry, our good friend over at First Case, she is the perioperative clinical manager and content creator for First Case Media. As an OR nurse and social media manager, Melanie enjoys challenging the status quo of OR education and bringing together the people, processes, and products that are moving our industry forward. James Carlock is the Regional Director of Sterile Processing at Mercy. James is a certified Six Sigma Lean Black Belt with a proven track record of improving quality and increasing efficiency while controlling costs. Ivo Holbrook-Smith is a sterile processing manager at Wellspan York Hospital. As a well-known strategic sterile processing leader, Ivo excels in fostering collaboration and making informed data-driven decisions on sterilization processes and perioperative services. And joining us for our host and moderator of this session is my colleague, Mr. Hank Balch. He is, as we know, the founder and president of Beyond Clean. He is a well-known industry writer and social media connoisseur on a mission to help equip sterile processing professionals with the skills and knowledge to fight dirty every instrument, every time. The panel title is It's Alive, the kind of data that does something. Are you ready to unleash the power of data in your sterile processing department? Our panel of industry professionals are joining us for a thought-provoking conversation dedicated to interpreting actionable data in the healthcare space. Our panelists will also identify the data points they find most valuable in their day-to-day responsibilities, as well as outline how they put data to work in their departments. Come along to learn how you can leverage your department's data points to improve real-time decision-making, optimize workflows, and ensure a safer patient care environment. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Brett. And yeah, welcome panelists. We're going to have a little fun here over the next hour. And obviously, like Brett said, I want to welcome all of our attendees. I make it a practice on the panelists that I host, or the panels I host, I always scroll down and look who's here, where you're coming from and what your title is and everything else. And we've got a great diverse group of attendees here today and a great diverse group of our panelists, speak from many different perspectives. But we got some regulatory folks who are tuning in. We got OR folks tuning in, a lot of sterile processing folks from the technician level all the way up to the director level. And we got some industry folks tuning in too, maybe to learn a thing or two about what kind of data we find helpful in our departments today. So a great group gathered with a great topic to chat about. Just like Brett said in the intro, I want to cover today the actionable side of data, or the data that does something. We are surrounded today in our industry with data, which is a good thing. And we finally have the technology now to surface a lot more of that data than we ever have before. But with that comes its own challenge of now what? And so we're going to spend the next few minutes here talking about the now what with this all-star panel. So let's start here with a quick poll, and then we're going to define actionable data before we get too deep into this. But first, a poll. So question here is, what type of data or what types of data do you currently use in your department today? Now, if you're a technician and you're aware of the kinds of data that your manager, that your leader uses, you can answer that as well. But in sterile processing or in the OR, if you're tuned in from the OR, what kind of data is your department currently using today? Are you looking at work volume, quality inspection audits, staff equipment productivity, none of these, or all of these? And I'll give you just a moment to weigh in, and then we'll talk about this as a panel. All right. And let's see what folks have to say. Well, interesting breakdown of these answers here. So we're right about 10% across the board for work volume, quality inspection, and staff equipment productivity. Jim, this was your proposed poll question. What do you think about these numbers?
Well, I think it's really impressive that 68% of the respondents said they're already recording all of those. That's really encouraging. What I would say is for those who are not, it's important then to identify what is the most important piece of data that you need to have. And I would propose that since everything really comes down to the people, the first thing you got to know is how much work you are doing so that you can know how many people do I need in my department, and then convince administration you need more.
Yeah, that's a great point about the people. What do you think, Ebo? Is this a surprise to you that in the audience, at least today, everybody's doing something with data? Nobody said we're not tracking any of those things.
Not at all surprising, especially looking at the results for the all of the above. That means everybody is using some part of these data. When you talk about actionable data is information that can be used to improve efficiency, productivity, and the quality of the work that we put out, which always ultimately impacts patient safety. And that is the big thing in sterile processing right now. So I'm not at all surprised with these results. And I'm actually encouraged by these results that we have 68% of the participants actually using all of the above data points.
Yeah. I'm not surprised either because we got a lot of all-stars that tune in to these Beyond Clean events. So what the takeaway, at least for me, for some of these numbers is, and I'm going to throw it over to you next year, Melanie, from the OR perspective. But I know the folks that are thinking about data that would register for a conference like this. It's like you. I'm not really surprised that they're tracking data, that they're interested in data, and that we got a big majority of folks that are actually looking at all those data points. But there's a lot more data points in play that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the session, and maybe Brian, you can speak to that next after we go to Melanie here. But the fact that you are tracking it is the first big hurdle, that you're capturing that information. And then the question is, as we started this session, what do you do with it? That's the most important question from there. So Melanie, from the OR perspective, do you look at, like when you managed ORs, were you looking at similar kinds of data across your OR team as we have listed here? Were you also looking at this kind of data for your SPD team that was supporting? Can you kind of give some insight on that?
Yeah, we definitely looked at all of these. And when you look at work volume in the OR, we're looking at caseloads. How many cases do we have on the schedule? But then what does that trickle down to? How many staff do we need? How long are we going to be at work? How much more workload are we doing orthopedics cases that have tons of trays that are going to be running through SPD? Because everything is interconnected. It's not just there's 67 cases on the board and that's it. 67 cases on the board might mean, 30 trays just for one case and then 30 trays for another, and then on we go. So our work volume, which then leads into our equipment productivity, all of it was connected. But then also once we had our cases going, once our rooms were running, were our trays correct? Were our cases pulled correctly? Did we have holes in our wrap? Did we have contaminated instruments? And that's the sterile processing side. But from the OR side, we're also looking at what were our turnover times? How long did it take us to get back in the room? Was a delayed turnover due to an instrument issue? Was it due to a case posting issue? A lot of things fall into what we were looking at when we look at our overall volume and productivity. And then we look at that data and see where we can improve and how we can make it better.
Yeah. So, Brian, Melanie brings up an interesting point that's, kind of obvious, but I'm just going to call it out again. These data points are interrelated. So if your work volume is high and then you're having some quality issues, right, it's going to drive your staff and equipment productivity down because you're going to be less productive because now you have errors and issues and challenges that's slowing down the volume for the day. And then all of these other data points fluctuate. So it's not as easy as just looking at one of these things in isolation and say, okay, now I know what's going on. It's actually the full scope of all of these inputs across not only sterile processing, but also surgical services, and then sitting down and saying, what do we do with this? Is that understanding as I described it, is that the common approach to data that you see out there from clinicians in the field? If so, why? If not, why do you think not?
So I'm seeing a slow transition of utilizing tracking or sterile processing generated data points and connecting and pulling that together with the EMR. That supplier and utilization, that demand versus production. Because everybody on this call is probably aware that you don't always use everything that's produced, but you still got to meet that demand requirement, dictated by the pref card. As you start digging into that detail, and we're talking a lot of data points now because now you're looking across both systems, but the insights you can gain, and the other element I'll throw in here, you touched on it briefly, Hank, is time of day, time of the week, quantifying, to Melanie's point, that utilization from one day to the next, quantifying the heavy and light days. It's a lift on the front end, but it gives you so much insight downstream to be able to communicate staff requirements, inventory requirements, potentially even equipment requirements to administration to dislodge some of those bottlenecks.
That is absolutely true. I'm sorry I'm butting in, Hank, but I have to agree with you because when we looked at our schedule, I was team leader for orthopedics for many, many years at a big hospital in Alabama, and working with SPD to let them know the days that we had our total joint days, the days that were revision days. It wasn't every day of the week. Yes, we had a surgeon who would throw a case on every single day, but the majority of the block schedule said that we were going to be doing total joints with this particular super busy surgeon on Mondays and Tuesdays, or Tuesdays and Wednesdays, whatever day it was. And so our sterile processing department could staff accordingly. They could be more prepared because he was going to have 10 to 12 cases, and we might have 20 to 30 trays for many of those cases. So having the people you needed based off the data, based off the information is very important.
Absolutely. It's a much different conversation making those requests when you can back it up with data versus I think, I feel. Absolutely.
So, Brian, let me ask you a follow-up here. Ebo earlier gave a great definition of actionable data. And as you kind of called out, with the integration of all the data points from the EMRs as well, we got a lot of data that's out there. Is this distinction that I kind of put on the label of this talk, is actionable data even a very, is it a helpful term? Is it unhelpful? Is there such thing as unhelpful data, or does everything have its own value? I don't know.
So let me answer that in two parts.
Yeah.
and this may be oversimplifying, in today's healthcare, if you've got a tracking system of any kind, EMR has been established for a decade now. There is a cornucopia of data. The challenge now is finding the data that is impactful.
Mm-hmm.
Actionable data versus data, is that data versus analytic? I mean, there's different terminology,
right?
But if you can create a basic platform that captures some of this data and action in an analytic, and it could be 3 or 4 analytics points. You don't have to have this massive tool to start today. And it could be something as simple as average trays per case. Don't sound like a lot, but over time, and Melanie, I'll use your example with the orthopedics and the revisions. If in January you're 4.5 trays per case, the OR has a 3% growth rate, but you go to 7 trays per case. Now you can say with data, this is why I'm asking for additional staff.
Right.
And you can get a lot more detail than that, but that's just a high level analysis of using both of those systems together. That could be a starting point. And typically there's a snowball effect, Hank. Once you start doing some analytics, it naturally progresses to more level of detail once you have better understanding of how to identify the data that you need.
Yep.
It's like a drug. Is that what you're saying? That you kind of get addicted to it, and then you go dig in like Evo does, and nerd out on it.
You can say that or the snowball, either one.
Get it? Yeah.
And sorry for butting in
Okay.
right now. So with those, like that was just said, that many different data points. We also got to remember when it comes to data, junk in, junk out. So we
Correct.
have to make sure we have clean data to begin with. That is when the analytics comes in play. And with analytics, one thing that we can look at is the utilization rates and cost per case. When it comes to cost per case, what is the sterile processing impact? For the longest time, sterile processing has been looked at as a cost center. But when you actually look at the data and the amounts of instruments we process and the other ancillary customers that we process for, sterile processing departments can be termed as a revenue generator, even though no fiscal money is exchanging hands. But if we put a dollar figure on our total output and speak to that, whenever we go to ask for a new equipment, we can actually use that data to make the case, hey, actually, if you look at it this way, we are not a cost generating center. We are actually a value added service, just that we are not charging the patient or charging other departments.
Right, but Evo, to that point,
Yeah,
you're
go ahead, Brian.
driving. I was just going to say, thank you, Hank. But you're driving, leveraging your room cost, because you're probably baked into that overhead. And the more efficient you and your team are, the better you're going to drive that for the organization.
Yeah, and it connects all the way to the surgery schedule, because the efficiency in sterile processing, decreasing in holes and wraps and other things means our turnover times are less. Maybe we can actually get that last total joint done before close of business, so that we, or the end of block schedule, so that we don't have people working late. We don't have people staying at the end of the day. We're not losing our call teams to cover additional cases. And we are efficiently using our OR block time. We're using our times in the rooms, and all of it is so interconnected that, yes, you can absolutely say that your sterile processing is helping with your revenue generating services because of how it's supporting the OR to actually meet those efficiency and productivity metrics.
And I think one thing that we need to discuss is how it's important to be sure that you're looking at the right information regarding things. There are different ways of examining how much work your department is doing. You could base it on instrument sets, or you could base it on how many instruments. As Melanie and others have alluded to, the case mix and the number of sets and the complexity of those sets really alters things. I have a quick little chart here, a couple of charts here that just really illustrates, I think, very well the difference. Here is some data from one of my hospitals showing the number of packs and sets sterilized versus the instruments sterilized. And so you can see put it together, pulled out the trend line. So the red part here is the slope, meaning the rate of increase. So over this period, we had a slope of our line, an increase in the number of 40. However, we had an increase in the number of instruments of 1,736. We added more orthopedics and especially more spine. So that is a very important distinction to make, because the packs and sets, it's good to have that information because that kind of translates directly into your equipment. Your washers, your sterilizers, they are based on how many sets you can put in. However, for your people, they're going to be handling each individual instrument. And so you need to, I think, make that distinction. If you're trying to look at how many people do I need, instruments is more important. If you're looking at how much equipment do I need, the number of sets is more important.
Wow. If I had a little video gif of a big bomb coming in, I would do a big bomb right now, Jim. That's a very helpful distinction that in all my years in sterile processing, and I'm coming up on 14 now, I have never thought about the difference in the data tied to equipment need and the data tied to people. I think, I guess I've just kind of been operating as blended information, but man, that is a really unique insight. And I'll tell you, I'm going to call out too. I don't know how many of these virtual conferences that we've done, but you're the first panelist ever to just share his screen during the panel discussion. I mean, dude, you came prepared. So kudos. If I could give some emojis right now, I would give some emojis to you too. That's great. So I had a question actually for you, Jim, now that we're talking again. The call out that Melanie made on the metrics that the OR is looking at. And then, Brian and Ebo were both talking about, various metrics that are interesting or helpful from the OR, right? So like, utilization rates, huge, right? Very important for us to know. But is there any other OR data that you have found helpful to making data-driven decisions in sterile processing? What are those data points that you would like to know more of from the OR, or that you think it's important that most sterile processing leaders or even technicians are aware of?
So I think the most important piece of information that I gather about from the operating room is the number of cases broken down by specialty. And then I take that and I can figure out, okay, now how many sets and instruments are we averaging for an orthopedic case versus an ENT case? And when we go and recruit an orthopedic surgeon, I should expect this much volume increase. But if we're recruiting an ENT surgeon, I should expect that much volume increase. Those are very important things to know so that I can proactively go to administration to say, we anticipate our volume is going to increase by this much, which means our staffing, our equipment, whatever needs to increase.
And that seems so simple, right? But I'm telling you, that is like rocket science for the CFOs in many of these systems. Like they just view like, yeah, surgical volume is going to grow. That's great. We're going to make more money. But it's like no one really ends up drilling all the way down to the implications in SPD. Like the best example is the intake or the upswing of robotics that we saw, a number of years ago. And we're just all this emphasis on, hey, new robots, new instruments, but no one really stopped and thought, what is this going to do to SPD? And man, it would have been nice to have that data proactively, like you said, to be able to come to the table and say, hey, if you're buying these robots, if you're recruiting these surgeons, this is the impact. The other thing, I think this might have been something that Ebo said earlier, but with the growth of clinics and all the clinics that are being onboarded to many of our departments that we don't get credit for in a lot of our productivity metrics. because if it's tied to OR data, we can do 100 million clinics, but we're never going to get any more productivity numbers because that's not factored in. But if you're tracking to the instrument level, like what you were alluding to with your graphs, really, really important concepts there.
Hank, let me
go ahead.
Yeah,
I sparked you. Okay.
One of the data point that is really important to know is the case time and the turnaround time. This is especially important when it comes to those turnovers. I know in sterile processing, our go-to is it would take me 3 hours to do the fast way of turning around the instrument for you. So if we know those turnaround time, we can actually factor it in and communicate in the OR when it comes to case planning. Okay, we have a first case here. Now let's put a longer case in the middle so we can actually have some time to reprocess the instruments before it's ready for the next patient instead of having those short cases back to back to back.
Yeah, huge.
So,
that kind of. Go ahead,
Hank, if I can, I'd like to really go another step from Ebo there. I love where he went with that overutilization and that exceeds inventory. Because if you now track that, that's good looking at the demand generated from the pref cards, and you compare that to your inventory, and chances are there's a date stamp on that demand. You can start looking at that overutilization by day of the week and actually forecast it and create that short list of inventory to take to administration based on the number of times you've had non-standard work that impacts not only the sterile processing, but also the OR, because there's all these extra steps to fast track those turnovers.
Yeah. So Brian,
we actually use data very.
Go ahead, Melanie.
I say we use data just like that to justify ordering new sets so that we could be more efficient, so that we could have more trays. Obviously, I'm speaking from an orthopedics experience, but my fellow team leader who did robotics, we did the same thing because trying to just, make sure that we planned our schedule accordingly, and you hope that patients show up in time, and you hope that everything goes like you've planned it on paper, and inevitably it doesn't. But if you have the data to back up, how many cases you're doing or how many times you're having to turn over trays, suddenly you take that data and it says, this is justification for more trays. This is why we need more power. This is why we need more orthopedic trays, or why we need more robotics, anything at all. That data is what you have that is tangible, that your people who sign the checks can say like, okay, yeah, I understand that. Let's get you more trays because this is why you need them. And that's what we did. And we were able to get a significant improvement on our shelves, and it helped our turnovers and our productivity.
And to speak to Melanie's point, that is what I'm currently doing. We send out a monthly utilization report to each service line coordinator and prioritize, okay, this is the utilization data for the past 6 months to a year. This is where it's trending. Let's prioritize getting addition of these sets before we get these new sets in, so you'll be able to have what you need when the time comes for that patient.
Yeah, Brian, let me throw this question to you, and this is more of a strategy question based on this conversation of overutilization, because hugely actionable data point, right? So let me just say that this is exactly the kinds of data that we are supposed to be talking about on this panel, but this is what I want folks to be taking away of like, this is something that impacts the day-to-day, that it actually tells you what's going on, and then you can do something with proactively. But I don't remember where I heard it from. It might have been someone from your team talking about the need to be aware of your downtime of instrumentation. Because looking at these, like, utilization and like overutilization, that's when you have all your inventory up and running. But then you go down one of those trays, and oh boy, it's an even bigger problem. We know statistically that trays are going to go down. They're going to, errors are going to happen. Instruments going to get lost. How do you navigate that, or like, what's the strategy to plan proactively so that we're not always on the cusp of, catastrophic delays or cancellations just because that utilization crosses over the edge?
So a couple of things, Hank, and I like the way you started this with that tray that's down. there's also another element for a lot of, especially, I'll say mid-sized to large hospitals, and that's the backup carts for emergency cases in the OR. If you've got 10 major generals, but you've got 2 on these backup carts, you really have 8 in circulation. Yes. Understanding total inventory, circulating inventory, and then you could better prepare for your example of, I've got to send this one out for maintenance. So I'm down to 7. And when you look at utilization, there's 5 days in an operative week, but a lot of the case utilization is not 5 days a week. ENT or orthopedics, I use Melanie's example. You use that total joint and retraction and power heavily 2 days a week. You use it every day, but heavily 2 days a week for the block. But it's hard to do the math with some of the tools that we have. And I think, James, you'd speak to this. You've had a progression of your understanding and utilization of data, I would assume. So if you start today capturing the utilization and you start adding the element of the day of the week, it changes the impact and action that data can drive. And you start pulling in the demand from the OR by day of the week, and it gives you a clear pathway to forecast, to Melanie's comment earlier, hey, I can anticipate having these challenges on these 2 days of the week. This is the inventory I need to relieve that, and still not have to dip into these backup carts, once or twice a month and go at risk. Does that answer your question, Hank?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm glad that you threw it over to Jim because I'm going to him next. So that's a great segue. So, talking about tools, right? So Brian just kind of alluded to, hey, with the right tool, you're able to look at this information and this data and, start seeing the trends and then have something, like everyone has said on the panel so far, have something tangible to give to the service line coordinators to take up the C-suite. But let's just talk about, tools and technologies here for a little moment. And, keep in mind, this is an educational session, so we're not going to be promoting any particular brands, but, high-level tools and technologies, Jim, like what have you seen out there that has been the most helpful in transitioning from a leader who kind of just has things that happens to you in your department to a leader that now what's happening and you're using these things to direct the attention, the resources, the staffing, the flow in your favor, in the favor of your customers, because now you have the tools and the tech to actually do something with that data. Like what's been helpful, high level and low level, doesn't have to be big swing of the bat.
So I would say the most important tool to me has been one that everybody has, Microsoft Excel. Yes, the instrument tracking systems can gather a lot of information. And oftentimes they're accompanied with a great package of reports and analytics. But if you don't have that, you do have Excel. I remember nearly 20 years ago when I was a young manager, and I was told by administration we needed to cut an FTE from our budget because we weren't meeting the productivity benchmarking. I said, well, wait a minute. What are you using for your data on that? And when they showed me that it was, hours worked per 100 items processed, I saw, well, wait, that doesn't include all of the portable medical equipment that we have to go and gather and clean. And so we didn't have any other way of tracking it other than having a clipboard with a sheet that everybody recorded. It was a checkoff so that, for this floor, we picked up 3 SCDs and 2 IV pumps. Right. And then I just took that with Excel and figured out how to consolidate the data so that it could total it up. When I showed administration, we were doing 32,000 pieces of medical equipment every year. It meant going from losing 1 FTE to gaining 1.5.
Wow. Yeah.
So the first thing is you don't have to have some fancy data collection. You can do it manually. Yes, it is more difficult. It takes more time. But Excel is powerful. Then the instrument tracking systems, the the first thing you need to really familiarize yourself with is how to get the information on how much work are you doing, and then get the information on when is it coming during the day so that you can know how to appropriately staff. We see it all the time. In decontamination, you have a bimodal distribution. You get a big spike around, it starts coming in around 9 a.m. You get a big spike around 11 to 1, and it stays there, drops off a little, and then you get another big spike right around 3 o'clock at the change of shift. So that tells you when you need to staff more people in decontamination. But having that in a format that you can put it in a table or a chart and present to your administration now gives you the people to actually do that.
Yeah, that I love that call out about Excel. I had a feeling that you were going to call that out, which is why I wanted to start with that question. But that's such a common tool that almost everyone has on their desktop out there, even if they've never opened it. But it's just sitting there, staring in the face. It's urging to be opened and trained and utilized, regardless of whatever other systems you have or maybe you don't have. So a great takeaway I would say is, hey, if you don't know about Excel, see if you can get some online training. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. Even on TikTok, there's a lot of accounts that show you like Excel tricks and tips on TikTok. So
I YouTube things all the time. I know a bit about Excel. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but if I have a question, I just search YouTube. I find my answer. Somebody has a little walkthrough where they're showing their screen so I can see it. That YouTube to the rescue.
Hank,
who else was that you, Brian, or was that you, Ebo?
Brian, you go first.
Okay. Two things I want to add to Jim is that, great call out for Excel. I know we're not, product positioning anything here, but pivot tables. If you're okay with Excel and you really want to exceed a little bit of investment in pivot tables, will raise your game in Excel so much higher to manage a lot of data. And then I love how James talked about the progression of returns. I've had the fortunate, exposure the last 18 months to see about 60 hospitals worth of data. And it never fails. There's a 7-hour window that about 80% of the product comes back to sterile processing. And as staff is short and you get busy, the first thing that usually drops off is scanning. So from a tracking perspective, you don't always have the full visibility of when things are coming back to their department, but there's a report in the EMR, your wheels out report, that can at least give you some guidance on when to anticipate work to come back to your department. So you've got one that's, plus or minus 15 minutes if your scanning's not quite where you want it to be. And you can start that journey on trying to align staff better with the workflows. Just a little insight.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about you, Ebo?
So I love that everybody is mentioning Excel, and even with our fancy instrument tracking system, sometimes when we will run the report, I export it to Excel to actually get that data visualization and some advanced analytics on there. And for some of us data geeks, I know if you follow me on LinkedIn, you saw me geeking out about Python and Excel, and data geeks will actually understand what the Python language is, and with it being integrated into Excel, it makes my whole process easier for my data cleaning to the data analysis to the data visualization. On a really high level, there is like Python libraries that you can use for statistical analysis and statistical visualization. If you want to go totally geek in data on that, you can do some complex analysis, and that is something that I think is currently missing in sterile processing when it comes to data analysis, because sometimes you require some data engineer to actually get you the data that you need from the whole masses of data that we collect. But with Python and Excel, you can type in some Python code and voila, you have all that. And just like you said, on TikTok, on YouTube, even on Google, you can Google some Python code and just do yourself some DIY teaching. So, it's exciting time for data.
So we're live here on this panel, right? So just want everyone to know that. So I'm going to make a live invitation, Evo and Jim for sure, but anybody else out there that is that kind of level of data geek around Excel and, with the new Python stuff that Evo's calling out, I see a tremendous need and opportunity for folks like me who don't know squat about those technologies, but I would love to know, I would love to be able to manipulate my data in these programs in a way that's more effective. So the invite is, I would love for you gentlemen and anyone else who'd be interested in this to potentially do a video series with us through YouTube that just goes through some of these, basic, but also kind of high level data manipulations that would be common in the average sterile processing department. Like, what does it look like to find your cost of case? Like you kind of mentioned that earlier, Ebo. And for this session, like we probably don't have enough time to go into the details it would look like, but I would love to do a video series of, sharing the screen. So Jim has already shown he's the master of screen sharing. So, sharing your screen, talking through the process of data, because what it's going to do for us, I know as an industry, is the more we can see it and understand is like we're smart in sterile processing. We know how to self-educate, but a lot of these resources have just never been given to us, especially as new managers or leaders. You don't get sat down in your office and be like, now I'm going to teach you everything that you need to know about all these things. It's just like, well, now you just need to do it. You need to figure it out. So I won't spend any more time on that, but that's the invite for y'all. We can talk about that later if you're interested, but anybody else who's tuning in or sees this later, if you're watching this 6 months down the road and you're like, oh man, I love Python or I love Excel, I want to get into that, please reach out to us and we'll get that going. Okay. Let me go next to you, Melanie, about tools or technologies that you found helpful in the OR. And then I'm going to ask a follow-up question too after that. But can you speak to that first? I don't hear you, Melanie. Is that just me?
Nope, I'm here. Sorry about that.
That's
My
right.
dog was barking a minute ago and I muted and I forgot to unmute. I apologize. However, what I was saying was I actually have a story that actually just characterizes the importance of data tracking software when we didn't have it, because we did not use it. And we actually had an instrument tracking software that just did not get utilized. And so it kind of got used some, didn't get used all the time. And since it wasn't used consistently, the information that I got out of it, kind of like we mentioned earlier, right? What you put in, you get out of it. I didn't get out good data because it wasn't consistently used. So when I was missing a tray, I could not find a tray. I needed to find, like, where is this tray? I need it for this case. The computer says it should be here. Well, it's not. So where is it? And so we would run into that and it would make it very difficult. But another issue we ran into is, a few years ago, one of our surgeons was leading a research project and they were looking at instrument tray reduction. And they decided that they were going to get rid of all the instruments that we were not using in trays. But we did not have the data to back up what instruments were and were not getting used. We just had their opinions. Except it was for all of the orthopedic trays. And we had 10 to 15 different orthopedic surgeons. And so foot and ankle, I had 2 different foot and ankle surgeons who had 2 different styles of doing things. I had shoulder and elbow surgeons who had 3 of those doing different things. And so like one surgeon went through and he cleaned out the trays and said, you don't need any of that. We don't need it. Well, then the next time it went to the next doctor who then opened the tray. He's like, where's my stuff? I don't have it. And what happened was we cleaned out all these trays and all we did was shoot ourselves in the feet, because over the next year, all we ended up doing was adding all of the instruments back because everybody had a different opinion on what they needed and what they didn't. So ultimately it didn't help and it caused a huge headache. Had we been able to track the actual instrument usage and how many instruments were actually being used each case, we would have had data to stand on that said, hey, you never, ever use this osteotome. It never gets used. We can take it out of the tray. or this, that, or the other. Instead, it was people's opinions, and it was a bunch of conflicting opinions, and all it did was make more work for me. So by all means, data is valuable. When you have it, you should track it and use it.
So
now
I
you're
see
speaking Brian's love language.
Yeah, I know. He's coming out of his chair over there, Jim. You saw him too. So let me ask you, Brian. That's the real world, right, that Melanie's talking about. That's the experience that we have from the conflict of data and experience. Like we've got some comments here in the QA, like one of the folks tuning in and is like, yeah, I'm a kind of shoot from the hip, kind of guy. But our surgeons, especially because they're the end users of these devices, when you start talking about utilization and numbers, you bring the data to them many times. They're like, yeah, I don't really care what that says. My experience is I may need that osteotome in 2 or 3 months. I don't necessarily want to take it out. But how do you bridge this gap, right, with actionable data? That's what we're talking about, Brian. So this is the data that is telling us that something needs to change. We need to do something with this. When it conflicts with not just surgeons, with OR team, with sterile processing. On like a great example for sterile processing is, hey, for the last 20 years, we've had 3 shifts. They all start at 7, 3, and 11. But now I've got data that says, we need to shift some of those around because that's not really matching up to the volume. And they're like, oh, no, that's not how we do things here. How do you communicate and translate in a way that's not attacking or offending, but also not devaluing that concern around experience versus data?
So that's the goal. But having the data and being able to educate and explain, especially if you're using that particular facility's information, you're not sharing something in generality, but hey, over the last year, this is how workflows come back to your department. You share with me that you feel like you don't have enough staff on evenings. Well, part of the reason you may not have enough staff on evenings is because you're pushing the work because you've got too many people early in the day. So let's go through your workflow. You got the capacity on the equipment, so you're not going to create a new bottleneck by shifting staff. And by the way, if you look at it by day of the week, you'd actually benefit by having 2 of your staff on 410s to really attack these 2 much higher productivity days. It's education about how to use the data. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, Hank, is that we've started getting all this information. How do you parse it? How do you properly identify it? And then how do you share it out to the broader team? Because that is a skill within itself to do those 3 steps. And that's where I've been fortunate to have a lot of opportunity to fail and succeed in that journey. And it is a journey over the last couple of years.
I think all of us on this panel have gone through those scenarios, just like you said, the failure scenarios or the examples that Melanie has kind of talked about on, hey, just because we have data and just because we're trying to use the data to do the right thing doesn't mean that there's other data points out there that we may be missing.
Correct.
And, utilizing that data to change the culture. I know that's not the topic of this session, but there is a cultural component to this, to just value this information more than your gut feeling or your experiential feeling. So maybe we can get some articles out about that in the future if anyone's really jazzed about data and culture. But we won't spend any time on that here. Let's throw out another one of these poll questions. So this will be the last poll that we do for this session. Get some insight around this, and we'll talk about that. It's here for a few moments here. So which type of data could you have today, but you just don't have the time to put it all together? So could you maybe have instrument data around missing instruments, but you just haven't had time to pull that together? These unused sterile returns, it's getting at a little bit of that utilization conversation, maybe a different flavor than what we've been talking about. But is there a way that you think you could capture those unused sterile returns, but you're not today? Loaner delivery compliance. And then, of course, the OR instrument utilization data we've talked a lot about. So you think that you have the tools today in your department to capture that? Or is there some other data point that you could have today that you would like today, but you just don't have time to do so? And if you answer that poll, if you want to put your answer in the Q&A, just so I can kind of see that too, I'm interested if what other data points out there that are not on this list. I'll give you a couple of moments here to do this. And then panelists, when we get the results here, I'm gonna kind of go around the horn and just say, hey, like, which of these have you had the best experience with, the worst experience with, or is there anything else on this list that you'd want to focus on too? So, all right, 3, 2, 1, and let's see what we have here. All right, interesting breakdown again. The largest one is what we've been talking about. We want to know what instruments in the OR are being used or not used, with a quarter of respondents saying, hey, I want to know what's not even being open, right? So like OR utilization, right? Like these things are actually being open to be utilized, but then these unused sterile returns, they're going up, coming down, going up, coming down, which causes its own problems as well. Missing instrument data, 12%, and then this loaner compliance data up at 18%. So still pretty hefty, a good little curve here with the data. And then a couple comments here that we're seeing. Also, broken instruments that are sent back from the OR. That's the kind of data that they'd like to see some insights around. And then, a couple other comments for the unused sterile return. So, what do you think, panelists? Maybe let me start with Ebo. Are you tracking all of the data that's on here? Is there any data points that you're not currently today that you see value in, or anything else you want to add to these answers?
So the only data that I'm currently not tracking on this list is the OR instrument utilization data. When it comes to the OR instrument utilization, my definition of it is the instrument that is in the open set that the surgeon is using. I know I have a set with 135 instruments in it, and I can guarantee anybody in the world that not all the instruments in that set is being utilized. So I would like to have a way to track the actual utilization. I know there's some technological updates that can use RFID and proximity sensing to know whether the instrument is utilized or not, but that is still in its infancy. So that is the only data that I currently wish I have. And back to Melanie's point about tray optimization, this data can be used for that tray optimization process, so we can actually get that instrument that is actually being used in that tray instead of a 25-pound set with over 100 use. That is overwork, and that goes against all lean methodologies. And all of these other data points, I have experience using those with the loaner delivery compliance. We do patient safety events in there because that impacts patient safety if the loaners are not brought in on time to enable us to appropriately reprocessing it. Missing instrument data, that is mostly for my awareness on what instruments to order and to actually pass on that information to the operating room service line coordinators. FY, these are the instruments that are missing from your sets. And I have a nice little Excel file attached to the color-coded. Green means it's ordered and it's on the way. Yellow means I have a request for code R, waiting to get a code R. Red means, the rep is not replying my email, so there's going to be a delay on this one.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I love that missing instrument conversation. That again, that's time for a whole another session, maybe a whole conference just around what to do about this missing instrument question. And Melanie, I'll throw this over to you. that missing instrument data, if you were to get that as a service line leader, let's say for orthopedics, like you mentioned, what is that signaling to you? Like this particular actionable data point, if you're getting that report that EBO's sending out, how does that change the way that you interact as a service line leader with those trays?
So I would actually, the team leader or the manager in sterile processing would give me that information. Hey, this tray's missing or this instrument's missing. And a lot of times what she would do would be like, hey, I have this tray, I can put it up, but XYZ is missing out of this tray. Do you want it put up? Or do I need to leave it down until I can replace it? And so what that would play into is, okay, well, which doc is using this tray? Is this an instrument that they're going to use and I'm going to get yelled at if they don't have, or do I think it can slide? Now, sometimes that required me to go running off to the scrub tech who worked with them all the time and be like, hey, do we need this or do we not? And then, but because we could communicate about it, because we had a conversation, then suddenly we could make informed decisions on what we were doing with our trays. I'd rather have a tray on the shelf to make sure I can do a case because I know a doc's not going to use this particular instrument than have an entire tray down and then suddenly we're waiting on turnover of another tray so that we can keep our cases going. But it requires communication. You take the data, you talk to the people that are using this stuff, and then we make a good decision. I might need to leave the tray down. It might just be what it is. But then that lets me go tell the doc, hey, we're going to have a later turnover here later, possibly because of XYZ, but we're going to get you going. We'll do it as soon as we can. And you can kind of play the customer service rep in the process to make sure that everything goes smoothly. But once again, it goes back to communication.
Yeah, it's such a complex question. And I know there's policies on both sides. There's policies that say we're going to put up every tray sterile. We're just going to mark it missing. And then there's policies that, OR teams have been burned so bad in the past. We're like, no, we don't even want that anywhere near us if it's missing anything. You keep that down and far away from us. And then there's nuances in between, right? About, utilizing data and the specificity of the surgeon and procedure, that's being used.
And that's how I chose to do it, just so that we could have trays because we were so busy. Everybody didn't do that. It depended on the service line. But for me, I would rather let's have the tray if we can use it and go from there. But that was my preference.
So, Jim, what about you? Go ahead, Ebo. Yeah.
With the missing instrument report, we can also trend what instruments are going missing. Right now, I see that tower clips is one of my.
What we throw them away.
What we also find out is the trauma shares. So trauma shares working in the OR prior, I know what happens to those trauma shares. So now that has actually informed the decision to move from those trauma shares to lister bandage scissors. We realized that those lister bandage scissors perform the same function as those trauma shares, but those lister bandage scissors are coming back to us while those trauma shares are not.
I love that. Yeah, that's just practical use of the data. That's great. Jim, what are your thoughts on the data here on this poll? Is there anything else that you're paying attention to that's not here, or anything here that you're not paying attention to?
The unused sterile return data is not something that we can collect at our facilities because it's not sterile processing picking the case carts. So that one is a tough one. I would love to be able to get information on that because that specifically speaks to demand for your work that doesn't necessarily translate into something that you can quantify with the data that's coming into sterile processing. Right. So, Brian was talking about basing your inventory needs on demand. Okay, and we all know there are some times that the preference cards need to be cleaned up because they don't really need to have that set on it. There are other times when, because of the unpredictable nature of surgery, they need to have it there, but they might not use it. And we can't simply say, well, because we don't sterilize it, we don't need it. Yeah. It's really important to make that distinction. A lot of our job is making sure that there's a safety margin. Right. And it isn't simply just what are we working on, it's what is actually needed to keep the patient safe.
I love that. And I mean, even
Absolutely.
the safety margin itself, can be built into the data, or, what we do with that data piece of the puzzle. So that's a fantastic call out.
Yep.
We are just at the end of our time. I know the 1 hour flew by like lightning, and so many other data questions to talk about. So if you want to contact any of our guests, their contact information should be in the little bio um, um, module thing on your screen here, so you can kind of click down and scroll down and see everybody. But Brian, I'm going to give you the last word here. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of data, great examples again of doing things with data, and I'm so excited that we really got into a lot of meat of that conversation. But what would you leave today for folks tuning in? What's the big takeaway for this actionable data conversation in all the hospitals that you're engaging with, that you see on a regular basis? Like, what's that one big puzzle that you would leave, or piece of the puzzle that you would leave them with today?
2 quick things, Hank. If you're a novice or if you're a geek, there's value in data, and it's worth the investment on learning how to utilize and create what resonates for your organization. And I think we're to the point now that it's on industry to bring better tools, to the professionals to make this easier, because time is still a factor for all of us. And a lot of what we've discussed today is not a 2-minute operation, especially if you're at the novice end. So it's worth the investment. I think you'll see a lot of value as individuals if you start this journey and start really honing that skill set on how to utilize data and do your analytic.
Okay. Well, with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you, panelists, for totally killing it. And I want to remind you, we got some takeaways and some homework to do on some training opportunities out there. But thank the audience, too, for tuning in to this a deep dive into data. But we're just getting started. So hang with us here. We got a lot more sessions to go. We'll turn it over now to the host.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Hank. Thanks, Melanie, Ebo, James, and Brian. That was a great discussion. And as Hank said, there is a lot more that we can pull out of that. So really, really engaging, and looking forward to more discussion that we can weave out of those conversations. If you are looking for CE, just a reminder that will be available for SPD, for sterile processing. That'll be available in the link on the right side at the end of this session. Nursing credits will be available at the end of today's conference. So stick with us. We'll have a short, quick, we're looking about 8 minutes right now. So about an 8-minute break, and we'll be back with the next session. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.